Welcome to Opening Bid, the show that brings you the hottest market takes and the most interesting business leaders. I'm Josh Lipton in for Brian Sozzi, and today we got a great guest for you, Joe Lonsdale. Joe is an investor. He is managing partner of the venture firm 8VC. He is also an entrepreneur, co-founded the data analytics firm Palantir. He co-founded a new university. He's a philanthropist. The guy's got a lot going on. That's my point. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
You know, Joe, I was thinking there's a lot of places we could start. One area I wanted to touch on, I thought immediately, would be another area where I know you got a great interest and tremendous passion, and that's politics, Joe. And I know you support Trump and Vance in this election. I wasn't surprised, Joe, to see reports this week that you're going to be hosting a fundraiser for Senator Vance in Texas later this month. For the audience listening, Joe, traders, investors, business people, explain why you support Trump and Vance in this election. Make the case for us, Joe.
Well, you know, there's only two choices, and I respect people who disagree with me, first of all, because I think there's a lot of smart people on both sides who are well-meaning people. You know, for me, Josh, you know what I tell you? I don't know. I have a lot of young kids here we were talking about earlier. I don't know if you ever read the book Matilda by Roald Dahl, but there's this character Matilda, Miss Trunchbull, who's this really mean, crazy principal, and the stuff she does is so crazy that you know she can't ever get in trouble. So, for example, she'll pick up kids by their pigtails and throw them over the fence, and she'll put kids in the chokey, which is this thing, you know, where the kids have these kneels and scaring them, and all sorts of crazy stories. And the point is, it's such crazy stuff that when anyone tries to criticize her, everyone says, "No, that's fake. It can't be real." And that's what it feels like right now with a lot of the policies that are being done and they're being proposed by this kind of hard left in our country right now. It's so crazy that when you talk about it, when you talk about the tens of thousands of Haitians that are coming in illegally and completely transforming a town with tons more murders and rapes and even eating the animals and stuff, people say, "Oh, it can't be real, it's fake." And there's just so many things like this, you know, giving hundreds of billions of dollars to NGOs in our society that are totally corrupt and just trying to get more activists out on their team. And so you have something that's just like broken and incompetent and corrupt. And I think it's all of our jobs to actually call it out and oppose it, even though it sounds crazy when you talk about it, because it is so crazy.
Let me ask you, Joe, but that's the negative. But give me the positive on Trump and Vance. Like, when you think about that and their policies, why are they better for the U.S. economy?
Well, so the positive, and that's right, I think we do need to focus on optimism more in our country. The positive is that a lot of things are working right now in our economy and will work if we can keep our free society functional. So the amount of wealth we're going to create over the next 20 years for everyone with productivity from AI, the amount of diseases we're starting to cure with biotechnology and other areas that are just really accelerating. Like, all of these things only happen if you let a free society create wealth bottom up. And the ideas on the Trump-Vance side is get the regulation out of the way, right? I mean, Elon Musk has been working on SpaceX for 22 years. Thank God we have this for our defense and for our country. And he's literally being delayed from launching his latest Starship to advance humanity because he dumped potable water. Potable water means drinkable water on the ground. And they agree it did no damage, but he didn't have a permit. And so they're literally finding him, you know, six figures and just delaying the launch just because they don't like him, right? So you have these regulators slowing down everything in business, targeting people like him and like my friends and many other friends in many cases. And you have this just such a positive, you know, result that can come from just letting people build and letting people, you know, do things without red tape slowing them down. And you have one side that's against the crazy red tape and for business, and one side that's skeptical of all business and making our lives harder. So it's a very clear choice for me.
So Joe, so Trump and Vance come in, you would expect, and I think you're suggesting this, kind of traditional Republican values and principles: cut taxes, low regulation. But Trump
it's not just traditional stuff, though. I think they are a little more populist. So I think there's some things like, you know, tariffs on China is something that's very controversial. It's very interesting, right? Because people say, "Oh, isn't that bad for the economy?" And, you know, tariffs on China is probably fair. And China has lower costs in part because they pollute a lot more. Lower costs in part because they have terrible labor laws. Like, it's actually something the moderate left and the left should be agreeing with. Like, we should be punishing people around the world if they are causing environmental damage, and they're beating our businesses effectively by cheating, by causing more damage. So there's things like that totally make sense to me as well. And it is a more populist take because it does kind of help our working class in ways we haven't done before. But, you know, that's you know, the fact that Vance is pulling the right over to focus on issues that do help the working class more, I don't think that's a bad thing.
It is interesting, Joe, because listen, we're about the same age, both Bay Area natives. I think about, when I was growing up with the Republican Party, it was Reagan and Kemp and free trade. I listen to Vance now. It's much different, Joe. It's economic nationalism, domestic manufacturing. China's an adversary. He has nice things to say about Lina Khan. He talks about Wall Street barons, his words. It does feel like there's this kind of a seismic shift occurring with the GOP.
Yeah, Vance and I disagree on Lina Khan. I think what he likes about Lina Khan is that you want to hold big tech accountable, and I'm totally aligned with that. I think there's lots of abuse coming from big tech. The only next scariest thing after big powerful government is big giant corporations. Both of them, I want to limit their power. Of course, Lina Khan is doing a lot of arbitrary things and a lot of things that are not principled, and so it is really important to me. The right keeps our principles of the Constitution and a free society and doing things fairly while fighting these battles, and that is going to be a battle we have to make sure we're careful about.
Do you talk about big tech, Joe, and you don't sound too complimentary. Do you support some of the measures that are being taken by the U.S. government, the U.S. government taking these companies to court, even threatening to break them up, Joe?
We have a lot of bullies. These companies get really big, and they censor people secretly, which I don't think they should be able to do in our society once they're that big. I think it should have to be more transparent. They have people who spend huge amounts of money building on top of them and then just turn those people off arbitrarily. And I'm generally for the free market and for businesses to be able to do things however they'd like. But I think when something gets to be so huge that it has an enormous amount of power in our society, I think at the very least we should force more transparency on their policies and make sure they're not abusing their power and not censoring things in the public square. So I think there is something there to at least force transparency on these guys. And because I do think you have some pretty poisonous ideologies that have captured our largest companies, and that their power should be checked somehow, not to just transform our society. As
a venture investor, Joe, don't you want big tech to write those checks to the little tech companies you're investing in? Isn't that a good outcome for you and your LPs?
I think in some cases it makes sense to in general allow people to acquire things when they're not a monopoly in that area. I think the idea of pushing back on monopolies is like one of the few legit roles of the FTC. Is something to think about. And I think in general, I tend to be on the Borkian side of the definition of monopoly. So if something's still benefiting consumers, yeah, I think we shouldn't get in the way. Obviously, it's good for me if we're allowed to buy companies. Obviously, it's bad for the country and for the innovation ecosystem if you stop letting people buy companies. So Lina Khan is a little bit too crazy on that. So I don't actually think it checks the power of big tech just to stop them from buying things. I think that's a mistaken interpretation. But I do agree with JD Vance and with others probably on the left as well, that you do need to check the power of the very, very most powerful institutions in our society.
For young people who are listening now, Joe, let's say they just got out of college. Maybe they skipped college and they were interested in a career in tech. Would you tell them go work in big tech?
Well, it depends what you're passionate about, Josh. I think if you want to learn how to build companies, you should go work in a high-growth startup company because it's a very different culture to be part of a company. You don't learn how to build Palantir by going to work at Google. That's not the people who were at Google could not have built Palantir. There's a totally different culture, totally different way of doing things. But if you want, I think you can live a pretty good life without taking a lot of risk by going and working at the big tech companies, and you'll still have some challenges, interesting things to do, and there's still some functional cultures there. So I'm not gonna, as much as I think some of the ideologies there are broken, especially if you go along with that ideology and you want to support that, I'm not going to judge someone for that. I think you can have a good life doing it. I think it's way more fun to go build new things and create new things.
You mentioned Palantir, Joe, and you co-founded that data analytics firm. Now, of course, joining the SPX, the S&P 500. Talk a little bit about how you came up with the idea of Palantir.
Well, we were at PayPal, and the Chinese and Russian mafia were stealing all of our money. As Peter Thiel and Elon Musk were actually competing with separate companies, Infinity and X, and they merged to become PayPal. And a bunch of other competitors were there too. And the biggest challenge in that sector, well, one of the biggest challenges was cutting down fraud. I think the company was losing $7 million a month or something back in a time when that was a lot of money 22 years ago. And I think our competitors went bankrupt. And so we had to basically build analytical systems. And right around this time, 9/11 happened. And we saw the government in DC respond by spending billions and billions of dollars. And the stuff they were spending money on was so much less sophisticated, so much behind the things we'd figured out in Silicon Valley. And this was kind of like a stomach punch for me, because I'd grown up as such a patriot, and you learn about the NSA and you learn about the DoD and how far ahead. Like the NSA was doing things in the 70s that no one could even explain why until 15 years later. They were so far ahead, and it was this real gut punch to see, wow, these guys are now way behind. And it was scary. Like, we're under attack. There's people who hate us, and we're way behind. We better go in and help them. And so we both wanted to get the bad guys and make sure civil liberties were being protected. That was a true start of the mission, and I think we succeeded. We stopped lots of attacks. We got a lot of the bad guys, and we helped put in these civil liberties structures that now run 40 allied countries for how we use data safely and securely to prevent attacks and stop the enemies.
And now joining the S&P 500, Joe, a tremendous milestone. What are some of the lessons learned, do you think, from Palantir?
Well, these things take a long time. First of all, I think a lot of people, they assume this is something where you just like do something and make a lot of money and you have a lot of impact in like 5 or 6 years, and that's almost never the case. Like, SpaceX I think was started in 2002. Palantir we started working on in 2003. Didn't really start building till 2004. So it's now 21 years ago since we started working on this, and that's how long it takes to build a generational company. It takes a lot of persistence. And thank goodness I've not been there for the last decade, although I've been an advisor. Thank goodness there's people like Alex Karp, my Stanford roommate and co-founder Stephen Cohen, people like our CTO Shyam Sankar Araki, so many others who have been there almost all the whole time and who are still working and scaling it. It's really, really impressive. It's really rare to get people who could do something like that for 20 years. But doing important things is hard. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of persistence. A lot of people wrote off Palantir. I still thought it was a smaller company, thought it was only doing services, which it wasn't. There's so many attacks over the years. So it's really fun to see the persistence and see them, have this really big kind of milestone last week with getting into the S&P 500.
It's interesting, too, just more broadly, Joe. You now see venture investors so much more interested and enthusiastic about defense tech investing. What explains that shift, do you think, of enthusiasm?
Well, Palantir, SpaceX, and then Anduril all broke in the defense world. Those are the three new primes. And Palantir and SpaceX, it was tough. It took years and years, a lot of unfair things. I think both Palantir and SpaceX had to sue the government at various points and won the lawsuits because it was just totally being abused and treated unfairly, and the government was wasting billions of dollars on incorrect stuff. So it was kind of general knowledge. You can't build new things in government. It's just don't do it. And those three companies now have shown that actually that's not the case. You can. And, we have things like EPRIS, which is the leading global company for shooting down things with microwave energy. It's called directed EMP that we also helped create after Anduril. So we have like 7 or 8 of these in America, new defense companies coming up underneath Anduril, Palantir, and SpaceX. And it's now recognized that it's possible. So people are excited. And, just like anything else, there's probably going to be a lot of things won't work on average. Things will fail. It's really, really hard. You have to build both a great tech company and a great operation in DC. You have to have both for this to work. But you know what? People see it's possible now, and it's a very patriotic, fun, exciting thing to work on hard problems. And so you got a lot of people going after it, which is, I think, great for our country.
All right, hold that thought, Joe. We're going to take a very quick break and come right back. Joe, we were talking about Palantir, and that stock has obviously been a rocket ship this year. A lot of folks have moved into Palantir, Joe, because they see it as a smart way to play the mega trend of AI. And I want to get your thoughts on that trend, Joe. There are some who really talk about it in these kind of doom and gloom scenarios. There are others who think, no, it's going to have these tremendous practical applications. My guess is you're more on the optimistic side of that, Joe.
Yeah, it's funny. I was telling a friend 10 years ago, we had Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg over for dinner in Woodside out in California, and they're pretty much aligned with each of those two views. I think Mark was on the much more optimistic side, and Elon was on the, wow, this could destroy the world side of things. And obviously Elon's not that simple-minded. I mean, he's using it to do things no one else is doing with Tesla and others, and now with X, and so he's obviously advancing it and help start OpenAI. But Josh, I think when you talk about this, you have to break it down to two separate conversations. One conversation is, does AI become the Messiah, right? It's kind of a funny way of putting it, but you basically have all these secular people that have this religious instinct around this, that it's the end of the world, it changes everything, you're basically creating a god. And that's a fun kind of debate to have over a few drinks or cigars late at night, and it's like, what happens there the next 30 years? I don't think it does, but some people do. The separate conversation is, okay, just let's assume it's not going to become that and change everything, but it is going to advance a lot. Like, is that positive or negative? And for me, that's extremely positive. I think both Elon and Mark, I think, would agree that it's extremely positive overall, this other side of it, where basically you're going to raise productivity a lot. Palantir is a great way to play AI and productivity. It's helping a ton of companies do things they couldn't do otherwise. They come in and in 1 week, they're able to do things the company couldn't do in a year with their data and AI. Because what turned out with Palantir, we solved all these really hard data problems to put the workflows in what's called ontologies, where you map out the understanding of their data and labeling it, understanding of their workflows and how they work together. And it makes it really easy to layer in AI to solve it. And we're doing this in a lot of other areas in the private markets. I think AI services, there's going to be probably over $1 trillion of the services economy in terms of wages affected. And we're already seeing doubling or tripling of productivity in these areas, in healthcare billing, logistics billing, many, many other things, back end of insurance companies. So you're gonna get a lot of kind of rote, boring tasks, just much more productive, and you're probably gonna pull out hundreds of billions of dollars of efficiency out of our economy, which is a very positive thing.
You mentioned Musk there, Joe, and it's so interesting because your own career is filled with so much Silicon Valley history. You bury a guy, you go to Stanford, you're studying computer science. There's this company called PayPal. There are a few guys there by the names of Peter Thiel and Max Levchin and Elon Musk. They're not, of course, at that point, not the bold-faced names they are today.
David Sachs, Reid Hoffman, all
It goes
sorts of
on,
characters.
amazing roster, right? What did you, at that point, you're a student, Joe, at Stanford. What did you see in those guys that made you think, you know what, I want to go work there. I want to go intern at PayPal?
Well, since you're asking me, I'll be honest. My freshman year at Stanford, I'd already been doing computer science for a long time. Thought pretty highly of myself, cocky young kid, and like, I'm going to go work there because I saw a lot of the smartest people go in there. I saw a lot of people I admired who were 2 or 3 years older than me. And Max, actually, we had an argument on a whiteboard about I don't remember what it was, some computer science problem, and he rejected me. I didn't get to work there that summer. So I had to try to apply again. But the sophomore year, I snuck in somehow. And, I saw a lot of the best and brightest people from my network at Stanford were going there. And it was clearly a place where you had contrarian thinkers, people who thought differently about the world, had really interesting conversations about things with them. And when I got to meet them on campus, and it was clear it was just amazing talent working really hard. And it just seemed like such a cool place. And, I'm really lucky I got to learn from these people.
And as you go on now, Joe, and so you go on to become an entrepreneur yourself, an investor yourself, were there, do you think, lessons learned from Peter Thiel on that journey?
100%. And I've actually written a lot about lessons from Peter Thiel online, about focusing on top talents, like focusing on the one thing that matters. Usually when people try to explain what they're doing, they try to give multiple reasons for it. That means they don't know the real reason. And there's a long list of these things. But just seeing how Peter surrounds himself with contrarian thinkers, seeing how he really approaches things with a kind of philosophical strategy framework, and really thinks orthogonally to others. And there's so much everyone can learn from Peter. Definitely worth reading his books. And when he speaks, it's definitely worth studying it.
What about Musk? I know you two are close. You're good friends. What have you learned from him?
He's the only friend I have who is bolder than me in basically everything, which is it's actually somewhat humbling, because I'm usually told I'm being way too bold and too aggressive and too pushing too hard. I mean, he's the only one who's like a standard deviation even further than me in that regard. And it's he really is just someone who makes things happen, who also surrounds himself with very, very top talent. He and Peter have that in common. And he's also put out some lessons. Basically, people tend to like optimize things that shouldn't even exist. So he's very good at just cutting down to focusing on what really, really, really matters in a very bold way, and only then optimizing it. There's a lot. I think it's definitely worth reading the book. Walter Isaacson hung out here in Austin a bunch because he was writing this biography of Elon, and Elon's living around here these days. And so I think Walter did a great job capturing some of these ideas around Elon as well.
Let me ask you, Joe, you've worked in a number of different industries, right? You created multiple multi-billion-dollar businesses. And from fintech, you've worked in defense tech. Is there another industry right now, another market where you see inefficiencies? You think, you know what, that's another market where I've got smarter, better ways to do things?
No, you're right. We are building a lot in those, but the most important area, we hit on it a little bit earlier in our economy right now, Josh. The question for my business is who are the smartest, most talented people, and what's possible that wasn't possible before. I think you literally have a third of the services economy in the U.S. This is like a $5 trillion wages economy. You have a third of that economy that you can at least double, if not triple, quadruple productivity and cash flow of a lot of legacy businesses there. So really applying AI to anything, with the right SaaS software, to anything that's moving paper around, moving back office workflows around. There's just such a huge area, and people have no idea how big that disruption is going to be.
As an entrepreneur, you're thinking about businesses. What are the limits to even starting a business now, Joe? I mean, it's not money. Is it talent? Is that it?
It's it's definitely talent. Like, we're not just like taking OpenAI or Llama and just like waving a magic wand and having like one or two people do these things. You need to build a great tech culture. So lessons from PayPal, Palantir, and others. At Palantir, I hired most of the first 200 people, and we really built a very effective technology culture with the best and brightest working really hard together, iterating quickly, really passionate about what they do, helping set the direction for the company with the technology ability at the very top in conjunction with people like Alex Karp and others, but really a lot of technologists helping run it. And you need to have those same cultures to build multi-billion-dollar wins. You need to have people like just extraordinary talent focused on a mission, building over 6, 7, 8 years at the very least to even get it to the first really big areas where you have a giant company. These things take a lot of hard work, a lot of focus.
And when you're hiring, Joe, for these businesses, these companies, these ideas, how do you hire? I mean, are you looking for experience? Are you looking for background, university pedigree? I mean, what are you screening for?
I'd compare it to a talent scout for a professional football team or professional baseball team. We have lots of networks where we have 1,000 fellows every year from the top schools applying, and we get 40 of them working with our companies, and we follow up and map things out at the top universities. We map things out at all the companies in our space. We know people we've worked with over time and their views on others. And the best way to understand how good people are is to have seen them in action and have people who know who they are. So we have these very large networks, and we're constantly the same way you would if you're running a professional baseball team. You're going to scout the top places. You're gonna try to get to know people and get them to like you and see what they're passionate about and bring them in. So it's a huge part of what all of us do.
Joe, so you're an investor, you're an entrepreneur. You also co-founded a new university, University of Austin, first inaugural class, right? Why did you start that university, Joe?
So Neil Ferguson and Barry Weiss are much more famous than me, are my co-founders. Neil's one of the greatest living historians, and Barry, of course, building the Free Press, kind of trying to recreate things there. And a lot of us believe that a lot of our institutions have been really conquered by a sort of illiberal liberal energy where you're not supposed to say things that are controversial. You're not supposed to speak up. If you go to our top 100 universities today, we're basically teaching our brightest and most ambitious young people to kind of shut up, virtue signal, go along, don't make waves, don't do anything that's going to get you canceled, and you don't think for yourself about a lot of important societal issues because it's just not worth it. And that's very scary to me. One of the reasons I think the West works after the Enlightenment and that America is exceptional is that we have lots of diversity of ideas in a pluralistic society that compete, and then we let the best ideas win, and we don't shut people up top down. We don't make them scared. And so I'm very worried where our civilization will be if we don't have an alternative way to kind of show these young people to just think courageously for themselves, to pursue truth vigorously wherever it takes them, and to really have that kind of intellectual boldness about these issues, bring it out into the world as they go out. So I really hope the university could shape that versus what's happening in other places. And a lot of people have seen after October 7th just kind of how sick a lot of these universities are. But it was even obvious before then to us how rotten it had become. And when we did this, Josh, 5,000 professors applied over the first months when we first announced this. And we have an amazing class of students now starting. A lot of them turned down a lot of the top schools to be there at our first week classes last week. So undergraduate class is going, and it's a real place.
We both have young kids, Joe. I'm just curious, you spin ahead. What do you think higher education could look like when our kids are ready, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
Well, we're trying to have a lot more experiential education. I think a lot of what you're going to learn is going to be personalized to you with the AI, but then you're going to come together and you're going to work with others in discussion groups and challenge. I think great teachers are still extremely important to learn things like that. That's the kind of the bet we're making with the University of Austin. Is it's not just going to be like the Matrix where you sit in the room and you hook up the computer and it teaches you everything. Like maybe there'll be some things like that for certain skills, but we think it actually still matters in our civilization to have kids at a place before they're working full time, get together, be able to hang out late at night with professors and others, read books, talk about philosophy, kind of learn about the world. I think this is a really healthy thing for people to do, and I think it's still really shaped a lot of positive things in our civilization. So I hope we can still have functional universities, even when our kids go to them, where they can't have these positive experiences and learn about our civilization.
Joe, it was so great to have you on the show today. Thanks for your time. You were generous with it.
Thanks, Josh.
This was Opening Bid. Tune in for more at yahoofinance.com.